Welcome to the Global Investor Podcast, a show that focuses on helping foreign investors enter the lucrative U.S. real estate market. Host Charles Carillo combines decades of real estate investing experience with a professional background in international banking to interview experts in all areas of U.S. real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Charles Carillo.
Do you have money sitting in the stock market and you're worried about it? Or worse, you have money sitting at the bank, not keeping up with inflation? My name is Charles Carillo, founder and managing partner of Harborside Partners. And since 2006, I've been investing my money and my family's money into income-producing properties. These are real assets, real properties with real addresses that produce real cash flow. At Harborside Partners, we provide passive investors who love real estate with a turnkey investing solution. If you want to put your money to work in real estate but can't find deals, don't have the time to get funding, and the last thing that productive people want to do is manage real estate. We find the deals, we fund the deals, and we manage the tenants, the termites, and the properties. Partner with us at investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. Go to investwithharborside.com. If you love real estate, you like the idea of passive income, and believe that income-producing properties will appreciate over time, go to investwithharborside.com. That's investwithharborside.com. Welcome to another episode of the Global Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Carillo. Today we have Loe Hornbuckle. He is the CEO and founder of Sage Oak Assisted Living and Memory Care, which is a boutique assisted living company with 5 locations in Dallas, along with 2 ground-up assisted living developments in Texas and Louisiana. So thank you so much for being on the show, Loe.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So give us a little background on yourself, both personally and professionally, prior to getting involved with real estate investing.
Yeah, I'm from Louisiana, dog lover. I like to play a little poker from time to time, and some other hobbies. I shoot long range, so like 1,000, 1,500 yards is kind of something I do for fun. And single with no kids, so that's nice because the company's my baby, so I get a chance to kind of spend some time there. Professionally, before getting into the assisted living business, I had a very natural transition. I ran a car dealership, so it's very natural to run a car dealership and then take care of people with dementia. It's just there's no steps in between. It's just a very, very typical journey, right? So I ran a car dealership for about 12 years and really learned a lot about relationship sales because I was mostly on the finance side of things, and so. My primary job was, going to lenders and trying to convince them why certain paper should be bought, maybe even though it didn't fit in their sort of normal buying criteria, get favors done, build those relationships. And so that, I learned a lot about relationship sales, because there's a part of cars that's transactional, right? You sell someone a car and, you try to get them to come back in 3 or 4 years, but again, it's a transaction. But when you're talking to the same lender every day, over and over and over again, it's much more of a relationship. And so I think that really kind of set the stage because assisted living's like that, right? You get a client in and you sort of maintain that relationship, getting investors for assisted living as a relationship management business. So yeah, that's kind of my professional background. My personal background is not that interesting because, I don't have a bunch of pictures of kids to hold up and my wallet to show to you, but I got a good dog. So that's good.
So how did you choose real estate as your investment vehicle going from this financing background you had in car sales?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been fascinated by real estate. I think there's a lot of elements of real estate that really spoke to me. So I started real estate investing in 2007. So I worked at the car dealership until the end of 2013. So for about 6 years, I was in real estate kind of as a side gig, kind of getting educated on real estate. At one time in Shreveport, Louisiana, I think we had about 75 or 100 doors. But, unfortunately, the Shreveport economy is not great. So, some of the reasons why real estate makes a lot of sense, I was just guilty of. I was busy, professional, and I was investing where I could control the deal. I think that ultimately benefited me because I learned a lot, kind of self-managing. And I don't think I could have done many of the things I could have done if I hadn't self-managed. Because ultimately we are the operator of the assisted living and memory care. So where you see a lot of investors, come out of California, for example, they're accustomed to third-party management. And a lot of times when you're in a small town or when you're in a market where there's not a ton of talent, you manage things yourself. And so there's obviously some benefits that come from that. There's some headache, there's some pain or whatever. But, on the other side of that is, you know how to manage property, you're comfortable touring tenants, you're comfortable dealing with tenant disputes, you're comfortable, in my case, resolving family concerns or, making certain that you're meeting expectations, things like that.
Nice. Okay. So give us a little background on what your firm's current investment strategy is. What are you looking for and what areas and markets?
Yeah. So we kind of have two companies. I mean, I know we talked about Sage Oak today. So essentially, Sage Oak is the brand and the operations company for the assisted living and memory care business, specifically that. We also have a company called Good Horn Capital. I'm the horn of the Good Horn. And my name's always second. I never have figured that out. All my companies, my name's second. I got to work on that. I might need a new manager, but regardless, so we've got Good Horn Capital. That's our sort of private equity type of firm, and we raise money for all types of deals. We really focus heavily in the Texas market. We have a project in Louisiana, maybe some subsequent projects in Louisiana, but they're very close to the border with Texas. So I'm from Louisiana, so we feel like we know that area very well. We really believe in focusing on need products. So we really try to focus on products that we think, people have to have. People have to have housing, obviously, the healthcare aspect of assisted living and memory care, strong believers in that. So, we mostly stick into the housing play. So we'll develop or flip subdivisions. We've done some paper lot asset deals. We've also, done some apartment development, some build to rent townhouse communities. So right now we're really focused on housing. Just that assisted living and memory care is a subset of housing, right? So it's taking care of a specific subset of a group. So Sage Oak's kind of our passion, change the world business. And then Good Horn Capital supports Sage Oak in that mission, but it also will raise money for other projects that we think kind of fit our sort of recession resistant criteria, because at the end of the day, people always need places to, live and work and play.
So assisted living is not something like a topic we've covered with much detail on the show. Are you able to explain the investment play with residential assisted living? I think with other, it's not as, I guess it's good because it's a niche that's not as sought after or as popular, I guess, is like multifamily or some other ones where it makes perfect sense because people can kind of see that. Most people probably don't have experience with assisted living yet in their life. So let us know kind of how that works and what the investment play is that you're looking for when reviewing an asset.
Yeah, I think it's probably better to think about it instead of a real estate play. It'd be no different than if you bought an HVAC company, right? So if you bought an HVAC company, you have to have software, you have to manage people, you've got to train people, and oftentimes if you buy a HVAC company, you have a warehouse, maybe you have a distribution center or whatever the case may be. Same thing with plumbing. So really it's a service business that has a real estate component. There's been a lot of people over the years that have kind of, there's a lot of real estate investors, in my opinion, that are looking for that next thing. So there's been a lot of people that have kind of spoken about assisted living to real estate investors. I think it's kind of backwards. If we're looking at a percentage, it's an 80-90% service business and it's a 10 or 20% real estate business. It's much more HR heavy. So for example, in apartments, if you have 1,000 doors, you might have 30, 40 employees. If you have 1,000 beds in assisted living, you're probably going to have 500 to 750 employees. Wow. So a very different kind of experience. So I don't really think it's a real estate play. Yeah. There's certainly ways to make it a real estate play. The most common way to make it a real estate play is you partner with an operator. So there are plenty of operators out there that, lease their buildings. It's very common on a big institutional level. Companies like Welltower will go in, buy buildings, build them to the operator specifications, lease them to the operator on a triple net basis, and the operator, retains whatever's left over after expenses from collecting rents from clients. So it definitely can be a real estate play. That's not the way we do it. We own and operate. So we love the real estate tax advantages. We obviously want to control the real estate. We want to design the real estate to kind of meet our purposes. We don't do assisted living and memory care this in a traditional way. We have kind of a niche play that we like to do on it. And that's really kind of our signature. We don't really deviate from that in any way. So we don't buy existing facilities. We develop our signature product because we believe it's the superior product and superior way to deliver care to people that, are so vulnerable, right? We're talking people with dementia that can't be their own advocate. People that are needing assisted living often have mobility problems. Sometimes they're vulnerable to have, medical conditions like, congestive heart failure or kidney failure or things of that nature. And so, because of that, we think the building is an extension of operations. And so, there's definitely a real estate play to be made, but frankly, when real estate investors ask me what's the best way to get in the business, my answer is always invest passively with someone that knows what they're doing. And it's just too operationally heavy, and I think what you realize is there's a lot of, there's obviously a lot of multifamily investors that are their own operators. There's quite a few. If the property manager has a problem or an issue, they have no idea how to fill a building, right? Policy, procedure, what to look for to hire a maintenance guy. for me, that's very scary. I never want to be investing in something that I don't think that I could personally or with my team go in and solve the problem. I don't want to be relying on a third party that's definitely not going to care as much about, what we're doing as we would. So we really do believe in in-house operations when possible. I don't necessarily know that has to be the case in businesses that aren't operationally intensive. Obviously I think there's a lot of mom and pop people that run storage facilities very well. Obviously industrial, some triple net stuff is certainly capable of being done that way. But in general, I think the more operationally intensive the business, the more you want to operate it in-house because you can have quality control, things like that.
So the management is handled all by your operating company that kind of manages everything. So you take care of everything. You take care of hiring people in the facility. You're taking care of having new clients come, move into the facility. So all aspects are handled by a company that you own. So
yeah. So the only thing that we don't do in-house is we don't do architectural and engineering in-house, and we don't do building in-house. But we do capital raising in-house. So Goodhorn is kind of our capital raising arm. We do design and development in-house through a Goodhorn product, Goodhorn Land Holdings. And then once it gets operational, then Sage Oak, of course, is involved in the design process, and then Sage Oak takes over operations. So we hire a general contractor to build our product. We have had partners as general contractors on deals so that we kind of had the effect of having it in-house. But we're in the process now of kind of transitioning into looking at HUD product. So there's similar to multifamily, there's a great HUD product for assisted living and memory care. And so once you become a HUD operator and you find a HUD builder, you're kind of off to the races, because one of the worst things about development, sorry if you hear my dog in the background, she gets very excited about HUD financing. So she's a smart dog. The nice thing about HUD is you don't have sort of some of the same personal recourse rules. Anytime you develop something, in your early stages as a developer, you're kind of all in on every deal. There are some non-recourse products. They're not widely common, but the vast majority of development projects that you do initially, the developer is often all in, right? They're putting up their net worth every time. Like, I'm betting on this, I'm betting on this, I'm betting on this. Is why developers often, have incredible success when they are successful is because they're taking, big risks, so we're in the process of kind of moving toward that kind of HUD product. But to answer your question, I think, there's a lot of people that shouldn't be, there are a lot of people that shouldn't be landlords. There's even more that shouldn't take care of people with dementia and mobility impairment. You can't be solely profit driven. You have to have a greater mission or a greater cause on what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you're eventually, over a long timeline, going to get exposed by the marketplace. Nobody wants to have their mom or dad taken care of by somebody that's only focused on the bottom line. Because if you're focused on the bottom line, you can serve crappy food for a period of time. You can cut staffing, sure, falls go up and, whatever, but that's just a bad mentality. So you really got to be focused on quality and quality control. And then obviously hope the market pays you for your quality product.
So what type of returns can passive investors expect with, or investors in general expect with assisted living properties?
Yeah. So, it's going to vary widely. Obviously you have it since we're, there's plenty of awesome existing projects that are value add plays. There's plenty of assisted living and memory care facilities that could be upgraded. That's not the business that we're in. Since we're in the development side of the business, a lot of times we're targeting, kind of that 20 to 23 IRR is often what we're able to see. Mind you, we're often doing that over really long timelines. We're very bullish on consolidation in assisted living and memory care. So think about mergers, acquisitions, and just sort of big plays kind of happening. So the oldest baby boomer is 77. Average age in assisted living varies about 83 to 87. So the people that are in assisted living are not baby boomers, really. You have some early onset, and you have some people that are, maybe weren't that healthy in their 70s that kind of make it. But in general, the avatar of the person in assisted living and memory care, they're in their early to mid 80s. And so because of that, if you think about you're an institutional player, you're going to wait until the wave is here before you start really jumping into the asset class. And so, there really isn't a baby boomer play in assisted living and memory care right now. In the baby boomer space, you're sort of focused on independent living or lifestyle communities, retirement communities, things like that, in which care necessarily isn't provided. So, we like 10-year horizons on assisted living and memory care, just because we think that's when the exit strategy and the multiples will be at their peak, right? So I would say that assisted living is probably 10 or 15 years behind apartments in terms of cap rate compression and in terms of consolidation, things like that.
Interesting. So one question that I have that we heard a lot of during the beginning of the pandemic was how COVID affected properties and assisted living. So how has COVID affected your properties, and what has changed over the past 2 years in your business?
Yeah. So I think it's for us, it's really been primarily the secondary impacts of COVID rather than the primary impacts. Our model has a built-in infection control advantage. So, for example, we've been operating in Dallas since 2016. So we've been operating fully in Dallas all throughout the pandemic. In Dallas, we've had one case of COVID brought in by a family to a resident. The resident did fine. We didn't have any internal transmission. So the whole pandemic in Dallas, we have one case of COVID, no resident deaths. No resident hospitalizations even. And then in our Lake Charles operation, which started in August, so obviously it kind of came out in the middle of the pandemic, we only had 2 cases of COVID, no evidence of in-house transmission. So our model really lends itself very well to infection control. There's very few operators that could boast those kind of numbers. We're very proud of that. But, when you have things like Texas, for example, had like a 4 or 5 month visitation ban, that's going to impact, right? It's a very uncompelling story of like, hey, if you let your mom move in with us, maybe you can see her end of life because you can't visit her otherwise, right? So that really was the visitation ban was very difficult, especially on dementia residents because, they didn't really understand, some assisted living residents could kind of grasp why I'm kind of waving at my children through a window or on FaceTime, whereas dementia patients sort of struggle with that pretty mightily. And then beyond all that, so I guess it would kind of be like if you're in a restaurant business, it's not necessarily that COVID, obviously impacts the restaurant business and clearly impacts assisted living and memory care. But for us, it's really more the secondary impacts, right? The government response to, fears. So what we kind of see in Dallas is whenever the virus is raging, things kind of slow down. And then there's this pent up demand. So we've actually had some of our busiest weeks and months ever in COVID. And we've also had some of our slowest weeks and months in COVID. It's been very polarizing. So that's been kind of the experience that we've seen. I'm in another market that's maybe a little different politically, and it seems to not have any bearing with COVID. So in Dallas, it seems like, COVID cases sort of dictate people's kind of pausing, moving, right? Like we don't want movers coming in. We don't want this happening. And then, in other markets, it hasn't been a relation. So I think it's going to vary a lot just because if you think about it, if it's really more for a lot of people, the secondary or tertiary impacts, is it a blue state? Is it a red state? Is it a blue city? Is it a red city? What types of measures are they taking? So I'm sure the experience in Florida is not the same as it is in California, as it is in New York, as it is in Texas. So that's really kind of been our experience. It's been devastating on the industry. I think the bigger impact on the industry has just been the impact that COVID has had as related to staffing, right? Very labor intensive business. And so I think if you were to ask, 100 CEOs, they're more worried about staffing or COVID. I think all 100 of them would tell you they're more worried about staffing. Yeah. Even though COVID played a role in that, I think that staffing is the greater challenge. And you even started to see kind of the CDC kind of, about I think it was about 2 months ago or so, they kind of changed the isolation guidelines from 10 days to 5 days. It was really funny. On Christmas Eve, they actually floated a version of that for healthcare workers only. And they cited staffing concerns as being one of the reasons. So even the CDC kind of started to recognize like maybe it's more important for hospitals and long-term care facilities and other healthcare providers to have adequate staffing than just like bulletproof COVID measures, right? Because, there's some risk, right? So if there's a 98% chance that after 5 days that you can't transmit COVID, following that guideline, well, that's still a 2% chance and with a very vulnerable population. But I think they realized that staffing was probably more dangerous because when you have short staffing, you have falls, you have mistakes, you have burnout, you have all the things that kind of come with that. So, obviously I think shortening those isolation times was important. Ultimately, the CDC came out with those guidelines for everyone, but initially they came out for healthcare workers. And I think there was maybe some pushback or blowback from folks that maybe didn't really understand that. So just a little inside information about kind of how it kind of happened and went down in real time.
Interesting. So I see, for the business, I like it because it's recurring that you have, and I imagine there's not much turnover. I would imagine you have less people moving assisted living locations, facilities versus moving apartments, right? So other than that, what are the main benefits of investing in assisted living versus other businesses and or, real estate asset class, I guess you would say?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, look, there are different types, just like there are different types of apartments or different types of single family homes. There's different types of assisted living and memory care facilities. The average stay in assisted living is about 37 months. So if you kind of get somebody that's very independent, they can kind of go through a progression with you. But, there's also companies that cater to people that have a lot of needs, right? So we kind of focus on people that we call high acuity, meaning that they need a lot of TLC, they need a lot of attention. And so they're on average, a little bit sicker than maybe a traditional assisted living facility and people move into memory care often very late in the process. So they might've been diagnosed 7 or 8 years ago. And now the symptoms have gotten to a place to where they need to do that. So, it's not uncommon to have residents live with you 5, 6, 7 years. You also have some residents that live with you for 5, 6, 7 weeks, right? Because they move in very late. So I don't know that's necessarily advantage. I think in general, I think the first thing that kind of comes to mind is I really think this should be something that you do as a mission or a calling. I don't think, I know I use the example. It's like buying an HVAC company. I guess some people be like, look, my passion is cooling and heating people's homes. That could be true. But, I think there's less of a moral or ethical case when you're, taking care of someone, when you're giving them showers, when you're taking them to the restroom, when you're making sure they don't get bed sores, when you're feeding them nutritious meals, when you're making sure they're engaged socially, when you're making sure that they're engaged spiritually, that all those things. I think that's a much more intimate service than, even being a plumber or HVAC or whatever. So I think the impact investing element, the sort of conscious capitalism element is certainly present there. It's definitely relationship sales, right? Not transactional. So you form these deep bonds and relationships with families over time, and you're working together in a partnership to help take care of mom or dad or their spouse. I think the thing that's nice about it is that, it does have all the advantages of traditional real estate in terms of, being able to use depreciation and other tax strategies to minimize tax liabilities. You have all, and then mostly I just think that because there's kind of a supply, demand, and balance of operators, there are not enough people to operate assisted living and memory care facilities that, if you want to become a thought leader, if you find this to be your calling, you can become a thought leader in this space in pretty short time. It's very uncommon for someone to be thought of as a thought leader in the apartment industry in 5 years. It's uncommon, but it's possible in assisted living. And so if you have 1,000 beds, you're probably a top 100 operator in assisted living and memory care. If you have 1,000 doors in apartments, you're probably not a top 1,000 operator. So, it's just very different in terms of the size and the scope of what the business is. So I think there's quite a few advantages, but the main thing is that I wanted to do something that I felt good about, and I wanted to help people. And, if I could figure out a way to earn a good living while taking care of people, I thought that would be a really beautiful pairing of my belief in capitalism, but also the idea that, we shouldn't be selfish all the time. We have to think of other people from time to time.
So what are some common mistakes you see assisted living investors make other than not having a real calling, as you say, for helping people at this stage of their life?
You mean like passive investors, or do you mean like people that want to be the operator?
I would say either. I mean, whatever comes to mind, whatever you see that people...
Yeah. So, assisted living investing, I'm a big believer of bet on the jockey, not the horse. So people chasing projects is the number one mistake. A great project with a mediocre operator is probably going to fail. A bad project with a great operator can often do very well. I'm in the process of exiting a deal right now that didn't go according to plan, but we're doubling investors' money. And I like to think that that's in large part because we, did what it took. This property opened right at the very beginning of COVID. It was challenging. That wasn't in the plan. Yeah. And so, when it's hard to get the state out to come license you, and you've got all these sort of labor issues, and the property really wasn't conceived very well in COVID. But we've been able to kind of battle through all that. And so I think a lot of, operators who weren't very good would probably fail in that spot. And so, that's kind of an example. So I think betting on the jockey is far more important than the horse. So focus on the operator, not the project is the first piece of advice. The second thing is that I think the business is going to undergo a transition. with COVID kind of being the accelerant. There's all kinds of trends that are happening in the industry. There's a lot of dinosaurs roaming the earth in assisted living and memory care. And COVID was maybe the first meteor impact that really impacted those people. There's a lot of people with troubling balance sheets in the industry, and that they don't really have a good philosophy on how to do things. And there's a lot of 70s, 80s, 90s build product that's incredibly obsolete in today's times. There's a lot of, models of care that are incredibly obsolete, bringing in people to care for them and then saying, hey, you caregiver, you take care of these 15 residents. That's a lot. It's a lot to try to take care of 15 people. I mean, anybody on the show that's ever had a couple of kids can tell you take care of 2 kids, pretty complicated. Now multiply that times 7.5 and make them weigh 150 pounds on average. And you could imagine how hard it would be to be a caregiver if you were assigned to take care of 15 people. You're not going to deliver a lot of care. You're just going to, try to keep people from, like a lot of times at night, you see these sort of dinosaur operators are like, look, we'll give you 20 residents. You take this whole hall and your goal is to not let anyone die. Well, that's not what people are paying for. They're paying for, they want, I want to be changed. I want to be checked on. I want to, have food brought to me. I want to have, I want to be engaged. And so, when you see that happen in the marketplace, this industry is very ripe for disruption. Maybe not from a technological perspective, but from a philosophical perspective. And so there's been a lot of small to mid-size operators that have found incredible success in this business and have gone head to head with the Goliaths in the industry. The big, just imagine if you opened a grocery store and you put a Walmart out of business, right? Imagine that. That seems crazy. It's the other way around. Well, in our business, because it's so service focused and so people based and so intimate, it's not uncommon for a scrappy startup to cause problems for a Brookdale or cause problems for one of the big top 5 senior housing providers.
Very interesting. I had one question as well, just kind of circling back a little bit, was from the time, how do you find a location? Because you're not buying anything that's existing. Okay. So you're building it, or you're taking over something that wasn't assisted living and making it. How are you choosing the market? And then how are you choosing how to really, work on that business plan, or like really execute it, and what to do with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the metrics are the same. So you obviously would love population growth. You'd love job growth. Not necessarily in the same reasons as you would the other things, because what happens a lot of times is, let's say you live somewhere and you relocate for a job, and then your mom or dad needs care. It's very likely you may have them move to, because someone's in assisted living, it doesn't necessarily matter. It can, but it doesn't necessarily matter if they're in the same neighborhood as they lived in, because they may not have a lot of visitors. So usually the primary caregiver, child or spouse, is within about 15 minutes of the facility. That's kind of a good rule of thumb. You can stretch that out if you have a unique product, but ultimately, so if someone moves for a job, sometimes mom or dad or the spouse follows and then moves into the assisted living facility. So job growth is an important thing to look at. You obviously want, older folks in general, obviously, and then you obviously want, folks that can afford certain services. So there's certain states where, $7,500 a month assisted living is no big deal. There's some places where that would be, top of the market. So that's kind of obviously a consideration. Right now, our strategy, we've kind of pivoted and just kind of realized that we're just sort of really fortunate to be based in DFW. DFW has so many secondary and tertiary markets that, we're going to focus on building out the DFW market and really establish what we kind of think of as kind of a city-based or regional powerhouse, try to get to 1,000 bed mark, in the DFW area. And then, ultimately, I think when you got 1,000 beds in Dallas, it makes a lot of sense for a private equity firm or someone to come in and say, look, we don't really understand your model. We want to acquire you, keep the leadership team in place, pay you well, and you can keep a legacy stake or something. So we think we'll probably be targeted for acquisition. So our strategy right now is secondary, tertiary markets where we think there's a supply demand imbalance. So we're not building in Dallas. We're building in, Denton. We're looking at opportunities in, outside of Fort Worth and, outside of, Frisco or Prosper, just McKinney, right? So these are places where, there's incredible population growth. A lot of these cities are have 500,000, 800,000 people, and they're 30 minutes away from Dallas. As an MSA, I think Dallas DFW is an MSA, is a third largest MSA or the fourth largest MSA in the country. It's big, right? But it just goes forever, right? So it's kind of not altogether dissimilar from LA. It's just a very spread out, interconnected system of highways. And so, but neighborhoods have kind of their niches and things like that. So people in McKinney don't necessarily, go to eat in Dallas, and people in Dallas don't necessarily go to the movies in Fort Worth, and, things like that. So essentially these are basically a very big MSA with very local, neighborhoods, communities, things like that. And so you kind of get down to the granular level, looking at zip codes and kind of seeing where there's kind of supply demand imbalance. And, we'll let all the people in New York, worry about building 20-story things in Dallas, and we'll just be building our signature product in those secondary, tertiary markets, 45 minutes from the urban core.
Very, very interesting. So how can our listeners learn more about you and your businesses, Loe?
Yeah, probably the best place to go. I mean, obviously, if somebody happens to be in the Dallas area or the Lake Charles area and they want to learn about some of their parents, they can go to thesageoak.com. So THESAGEOAK.com. And that's obviously that's going to be like a retail facing assisted living and memory care company. If they want to learn more about investing, then obviously that would go to the Goodhorn side of things. So they can go to Goodhorn Capital, GOODHORN Capital, CAPTITAL.com. So goodhorncapital.com. And they can learn more about investing. And we've also set up a little free giveaway. We can give them a copy of a book called The Sage Oak Story. So they go to Goodhorn Capital, name and email address. We'll send them a digital copy of The Sage Oak Story, and they can learn a little bit more about kind of the founding of the company and kind of why we do what we do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Looking forward to connecting with you in the near future, and have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a fun show.
Hi, guys. It's Charles from the Global Investors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in getting involved with real estate, but you don't know where to begin, set up a free 30-minute strategy call with me at schedulecharles.com. That's schedulecharles.com. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Global Investor Podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Google Play to get new weekly episodes. For more resources and to receive our newsletter, please visit globalinvestorpodcast.com. And don't forget to join us next week for another episode.
Nothing in this episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this podcast are limited to accredited investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure, subscription documentation, and are subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Syndication Superstars, LLC exclusively.